Okay, everyone, can everyone hear me? Yes, everybody's good. Okay, I just want to make sure. We've got Kate on the line. I can't see her. Okay, so I'll call this meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. This is Committee of the Whole, July 6th. Any declaration of special interest or general nature thereof, please declare it now. Seeing no declarations, we'll move on to number 3 on the agenda, which is delegations and presentations. And we'll ask Malroz Engineering to provide us with the landfill compliance summary. And we'll put a motion on the floor once the delegation is done. So we'll ask Mr. Pashiwak. Sorry, I butchered that pretty bad. Sorry, I have a last name that everybody else butchers, so I'm used to it, but I feel badly when I do it just the same. And that's Mr. Pike, who is also on the line. So we'll turn the floor over to both of you and whoever would like to go first, and then we'll open the floor up for the committee to ask any questions. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If the gentleman from Malroz would like me to share my screen and so everyone can see their presentation, I can certainly do that. Or
Mr. Which one?
Sure, that'd be fine.
Okay, so thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor, councillors, staff, and others, constituents. My name is Albert Pashkowiak, here to present tonight a summary of the landfills in the Township of Leeds and Thousand Islands. We're going to provide a brief overview of the status of those landfills as they are now, summarize the annual activities that have occurred, and then go a little bit further into detail about compliance and about what tasks have been completed and what tasks remain outstanding or are in the works for this year and next. We can proceed to the next slide. Great. So just a reminder, there are 6 landfills in total that we've been focusing on. We have Briar Hill, Lansdowne, Escott, Leeds, Reynolds Road, and LaRue Mills. Go ahead. So here we have just a summary of the metrics for each of the active landfills. These landfills are open and are accepting waste. We provided values on total capacity, remaining capacity, a yearly fill rate, and then a lifespan, projected lifespan, I should say, as of 2019. Of note, the township staff have done quite a few efforts, undertaken quite a few efforts to optimize the work at some of these sites, optimize the way they run, and that's reflected in some increased capacity at the Escott site. So you'll notice that's a little bit more than what it was last time we reported on this. Okay. Before we get into details about compliance, it's best to sort of step back and give a brief overview of what compliance is. Landfills can achieve compliance in 2 different ways or have 2 different requirements. One would be the ECA, which stipulates specific tasks that need to occur in order for compliance to be maintained. And the other is through B7 or reasonable use. And so what I've done here is just given a brief CSM. Some of you have seen this before. This demonstrates what reasonable use is. And essentially what it is the water leaving or the material leaving the landfill cannot decrease or degrade groundwater quality on the adjacent property beyond a certain amount. And that amount is a calculation provided by the ministry in their reasonable use policy, referred to as B7. So it's to calculate this, you would get your background information, your background data, your data at the property line, and you would run the calculation and determine whether or not you're exceeding or you're under. Okay. So again, just to sort of support our discussions going forward, here's a few definitions and some abbreviations that we'll be using. So CAS is contaminant attenuation zone, buffer lands. We'll be talking about surface water, groundwater, certificate of requirements, which relates to title, registration of activities on title, and B7 guideline. The next slide. We can move on there, Vanessa.
Oh, we're at Briar Hill. No, we're at...
Great. So the first landfill that we'll discuss here is Briar Hill. So the items listed in the top here are the tasks that have been completed. in 2019. So we've done the annual monitoring and sampling. There's a closure plan that's been initiated and is in development for that site. Unused wells have been abandoned, and we have an action plan in place with the ministry. It's been submitted to the ministry to resolve any compliance issues that are perceived on the site at this time. And then going forward, the outstanding tasks for this property are to evaluate the current property boundary and CAS, just to make sure that they jive together and they're sufficient for that site. We need to establish trigger mechanisms for the surface water that it's flowing past the site, and need to register the landfill to title and submit the closure plan. Lansdowne updates. The 2019 monitoring and sampling is complete. Additional drilling was completed, and this was in follow-up to the request from the ministry to further delineate bedrock conditions as well as downgradient overburden conditions. We've evaluated the groundwater and surface water interactions at the site and done some additional sampling just to confirm that leachate isn't egressing further to the north past the roadway. So the outstanding tasks at this stage are to revise the closure plan that was submitted last year, and that's just revisions following the drilling and collection of data from the drilling program. So what we'd like to do is have a few groundwater monitoring events under our belts, get some data from that, from the new wells we've installed, and then reassess where we're at with compliance on the eastern and northeastern property boundaries. And beyond that, establish a trigger mechanism for the surface water. So Escott, we've refined the remaining capacity. You'll notice it's up to 2.6 years. Again, a lot of this has to do with efforts from the township staff. They've done a great job on minimizing the waste space and compacting the material that's already there. And that's seen an increase in capacity, if you will. So additional waste space reduction has been completed. We've submitted a closure plan to the MECP for the site, so that's been completed. Additional drilling was also completed. This was in response to the ministry's request to, again, achieve reasonable use compliance or B7 compliance on the northeastern property boundary. So additional wells were installed in bedrock and overburden, and we're in the process of collecting data from those wells to determine if we are in compliance or not. Outstanding tasks for this site, we're awaiting comments from the ministry on the closure plan we submitted and awaiting the data from this year to reevaluate B7 and the extent of the current CAS to see if it's sufficient. So Leeds, 2019 monitoring and sampling, that's been completed. We're in the process of negotiating a reduced sampling suite for this site. This is an old site that's been around for some time. And our thoughts are that there's no need to keep a robust sampling set if you already have established parameters and the landfill isn't really changing at all. So our goal here is to reduce that monitoring suite as much as possible to optimize it and get it to what's required. Outstanding tasks for this property, this site, include developing a trigger mechanism. We're going to evaluate the current property boundary and CAS as we were in the other sites, and working with the MECP just to leverage the existing information we have to, again, reduce that monitoring program. So we're in talks with them to hopefully chop that down quite a bit. So the Rue Mills, there was a requirement for surface water sampling, and based on our work last year, that's been basically negated. There's no need to do it anymore. The ministry has agreed with our position that everything is fine there. The landfill is not really damaging the nearby surface water or groundwater. So that's been reduced to semi-annual inspections. And all it is just someone going out, making sure that the cap is intact and that there's really no damage to the landfill itself or no obvious sources of contamination. So significant reduction in required annual tasks on that site. And there are no outstanding tasks at this stage for the Rue Mills. There's been a lot of movement on the Reynolds Road site, specifically the ECA amendment. We've completed an ECA amendment. The ministry has agreed with our suggestions, and those have included removing the groundwater and surface water monitoring, similar to the Rue Mills. So again, this has been converted to semi-annual inspections only, which is a significant reduction in the required amount of work done every year on these sites. The registration of the landfill to title is underway, and there are no outstanding tasks at this stage. So our ongoing approach from this point onward is to complete those ECA applications when required by the MECP. We're going to continue reviewing the SCOT data as it comes in this year to monitor our recent drilling program and monitor the data to see if there's compliance. If necessary, purchase contaminant attenuation zones where required and complete the registration of CORs. Many of those CORs are actually, they're already been submitted by the lawyers, the township lawyers. So that's underway and should be completed relatively quickly. Continued discussions with the MECP, and again, just to obtain concurrence here on our approach. So making sure they agree with our trigger mechanism programs, our plans to resolve B7 issues, and so on, and closure plans as well. And then overall, the approach here is to use the existing data that we do have for these sites and try and reduce down the monitoring and sampling requirements as much as possible. On many of them, it's very robust, and in some cases, some of the wells may not necessarily be necessary. And so the intent here is to say, let's reduce as much as possible. Thank you for your time. I think that's it for us.
Okay. Does anybody have questions? I see Councillor Fody wants in, Councillor Burrell, and then Councillor Maybe. So we'll have that in those. Oh, Councillor Jameson will also get in. So Mr. Fody, you're unmuted.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Do you have quick reference as to the closure dates of the 3 closed sites? Did you have that right there before you? The actual years?
It's been many years for some. I don't have the exact dates right in front of me, but for some of them, it's been a significant amount of time. John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think up to 30 years.
I want to say Leeds closed at the late 80s, maybe like 1990. And
Okay.
Road was really, the ministry indicated that it was only open for a couple of years in the 70s. It's pretty small. Right. And then LaRue Mills, that we put to bed last year. So I kind of put it out of my mind.
Okay, a follow-up. The reason I'm asking, with the statement that you're no further requirements on water sampling on Reynolds Road, for instance, I assume the flip of that translation is that there's less leachage or no concern or very little concern of any more contaminants coming from that site, correct?
That's correct. The ministry's looked at the years of the groundwater sampling that's taken place there, as well as the surface water data. And both the ministry and ourselves have concluded that there's no adverse effect from the landfill and that it's well understood.
Okay, my final point. I remember when that landfill was there, and it is small, very small.
Yes.
And back in an era when plastics likely were all but non-existent on a landfill site. My point is, a resident bought the property on the east side of County Road 3, opposite side of the County Road 3 that the waste site is on.
Yes.
Is it because of your restrictions being lifted or softened, is it possible for that resident to build houses? That was the reason that 2 properties, I believe, is their intent. Is that possible now? Because we may have to change, or if it's possible to change on our planning department, the restrictions close to a waste site. When they bought this property, it was very kind of no one to tell them that that was the situation. They were unaware it was a waste site even there. And they've owned this property for a number of years now. And when I saw your restrictions being reduced here on this waste site, I'm wondering if that, from your opinion, allows us to go ahead with the build. I mean, they're on the upside. That doesn't mean the well water, as you would well know better than I. I mean, you could drill down 190 feet and be subgrade on the well as far as the water table. But the land slope itself is upgrade from the waste site. The waste site, as you know, on Reynolds Road is sub County Road 3.
Yes.
The property these people have bought with the intent to build is escalated from there.
So I'm sure that's something that could be discussed with the township staff, the planning staff and engineering staff. It'd be something we'd want to revisit with the Ministry of the Environment. A lot of times those building restrictions are in place to protect the municipality against having to come back and buy a house or provide an alternate water supply. So looking at that risk, it's something that we could certainly look into with the ministry on whether that changes their comfort level in eliminating the monitoring, because they've eliminated the monitoring based on the current site setting. So whether that would then bring the monitoring cost back to the township that we've eliminated, and whether that's something they're comforted with, as well as what the risk might be to the municipality having a drinking water well across the street. And it's a bit of a vague answer, but I'd have to go back into the landfill data and look at what way groundwater is flowing. And really in that landfill, we only looked at the shallow water within the waste itself. So there might be, it's potential, but
I can jump in, John.
Conversations that would be necessary.
Yeah, I think what could be possible there, if you're looking to build something across the road there may be like requirements to do a little bit more investigation just to determine that what is over there is indeed usable and a safe place to build. The existing wells on site are just on site, and off-site groundwater in that area isn't well understood or characterized. So John's correct. There might be a little bit more discussion to have, and certainly we don't mind being a part of that.
Right. Okay. Thank you. No, I wasn't looking for a concrete answer for either one of you gentlemen tonight. I was just looking for a perspective, how you would see that. That particular site does have housing on either side of it and around it at different grades to compare to as far as well water. Granted, it's further afield. That's it. I won't burden you with any further questions. Thank you.
Councillor Gorell next, and then Councillor Maybe, and then Councillor Jameson.
Thank you. Hello. I was just wondering, gentlemen, good evening. I was just wondering, we had allowed a certain expansion of our rules regarding the waste sites, and it increased apparently considerably the use of our waste sites. And I just wondered, are your current dates, the 2.6 years and so on for Escott, are those accurate to now, or was that 6 months ago? Just trying to get a.
That was as of end of last year. So those are the numbers that we've reported in the 2019 annual monitoring report. And the survey, all of that is based on volumes. And so we get those volumes from survey data that we collect. And that survey data was as of, I believe, December 2019.
Okay, I'm not sure whether the increase that was mentioned to us in a report would be significant, and whether it's had an impact. But anecdotally, when you see it, it looks like it might have had an impact. Thank you. All I have to ask. Thank you.
Councillor Maybe, and then Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I have several questions. Not a surprise, right? Okay, so Lansdowne has roughly 10% remaining. I've always had a couple questions about it. Is there a possibility of it going higher? One, is there a possibility of buying the land beside it and making another one? What is the cost in doing that? You know, I keep hearing that we've got to truck our waste away, but are there not other options? And I've always been amiss of have they been explored? Can we explore them? Is there new technology? As in even a small incinerator with power generating capabilities. And maybe to that end, in the end, we actually excavate our garbage sites and repurpose it as fuel for it. So is there that capability? And what are the costs of actually trucking our garbage to other landfills that are accepting garbage on large scale, you know, over a course of a year or years? You know, where's our balance in dollars? Which way is more economical for us? Yes, there's costs. No matter how you cut this cake, it doesn't matter. But I don't think we have the information, at least I don't feel, and I don't have it, and I stand corrected, that there isn't enough information to actually give us a good basis of where our direction is. And I think we have to look 20, 30, 40 years down the road here for our township to actually make a better valued decision on what we're doing. As much as you know, Lansdowne has 5 to 6 more years. I remember using that one 40 years ago, let alone the Leeds one. I used it too years and years ago. So I really have a lot of questions on how we can move forward and look after this problem, maybe within our own borders, you know, meeting all the compliance issues. And what is the cost of having a new site, perhaps? Is that a possibility, opposed to even having the one beside the Lansdowne site? And just to step back to a question on the water at Reynolds Road, I believe it runs southwest away from that property in question. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Oh, okay, and there's a good list there with respect to the volume. I think one of the initiatives the township's proceeded with in doing more to control the waste phase than doing compaction, because garbage is quite compactable. That is something that saves you space, because once final cover is applied to areas of the landfill, because the landfills are progressively covered, you can't then go back and shove it back and recompact it. It's something that needs to happen on a progressive basis. So it really depends on the amount of waste that's brought into the landfill and then how it's managed once it gets there. So I tried to jot down a few notes here, so I'll try and go in order. With respect to an expansion, this is a historic landfill, like as you noted, that has decades on the record, and we're still resolving certain issues with the contaminant attenuation zone. To go through a landfill expansion process, you're going to be starting under the current rules, and that's going to require an EA process, which is quite expensive and it's quite time consuming. If you look at the landfills that have been built across Ontario, City of Toronto built one west of Toronto, and then in our area, there's certainly been some concern over, I believe it's a county landfill that was previously approved, and that's an approved landfill already. And then even down into Moose Creek, that was approved 10, 15 years ago. We are running out of landfill space in Eastern Ontario, and a lot of municipalities are facing this challenge as their existing facilities fill up, and where do you take it? I'm from Wolf Island. That landfill closed better part maybe 4 years ago. They now truck it to Kingston.
Yes.
Sorry for them on limited ferry capacity. With respect to incineration, it's certainly an interesting idea. I was involved in the auditing of the Durham York Energy Center just past Darlington Nuclear Power Plant. And there, for Durham region, they're 100% of their waste through the incinerator. And that was a partnership with York region. I think they're a 20% partner in that. That facility is about 2/3 built out. There's two boilers in that incinerator, and there's room for a third. And they like that idea. It fixed their landfill costs, because that was a design build. Were able to fix those costs for 20, 30 years. I think Durham said they spent better part of 10 million getting the permit for the facility, and then $250 million to build it. And that was Durham and York regions, but it was a local Kingston person that leads waste management in Durham region. Mirka Jankowicz, who used to be solid waste manager with the city of Kingston, is now it has been for quite a while in Durham region. So that's possible. It's just they faced extensive citizen opposition within Clarington and the neighboring communities to get that permitted, and that was through a full EA and ECA process with the Ministry of the Environment. And with respect to the cost of trucking, I'm sure township staff are more paid on costs associated with that, and are aware of what other municipalities are spending to haul waste away, but it's certainly not something that's getting cheaper. I think I touched on a few of your points. If I missed one, I apologize.
Yes, thank you very much. Those are most of my points, and thank you for all of that. And I really do look forward to having some comparative costs, and thank you for the cost of the incinerator. even with the incinerator, the one that you talked about in Durham is much larger than the one that
Yes.
I would even propose perhaps for us. So again, scaling costs, you know, against trucking or even with the second parcel beside the current Lansdowne one, if it was brought into code deeper with clay base as they have nowadays and such, its leachate would be a lot less inherent to traveling through the soil with the new regulations opposed to what we have there, it being there 40 or plus years. So that's why I bring it up that, you know, if we build it to today's standards, same size, we're going to have quite a few years of life of that site because it'll never be sold or used for anything else but the waste site, even when it's finally capped. So it's a piece of lost property in my mind. So I just put it out there that I think we've got to find and source all the options. And I know there's been committees before that have gone through this, which you probably have been part of also. But being a newer council, some of these ideas we may not have heard or had the conclusion of what's been proposed before. So I look forward to any new information that can be brought to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Mr. Jameson and then Mr. Goheen, you want to get into.
Is that all right, Your Worship?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, the questions really are first in this space and time, but I just want to say I really appreciate Councillor Maybe's perspective on this. Just digging holes and putting stuff in them. We're not doing future generations any favor. And I realize it is not in the brief of our engineering firm that's helping us, but it's clearly something we need a little vision. And there are, you know, there's these various incinerators sitting in little European towns that are incredibly efficient to do wonderful things. So they don't have to be what they put in Durham, which is quite a remarkable installation. There are all kinds of alternatives, and we really need to look a little farther ahead than next week. So my question dealing with this week is that the 32 years, for example, allegedly at Briar Hill, is that taking into consideration that the other two sites, one closes in 5 or 6 years, the other closes in 2 or 3 years? Does that mean we're trucking it all up? Well, trucking it all up to my neighborhood, or is that part of your calculation? Maybe I'm just being mischievous, but at some point, where does the stuff go when we can't put it where it's going? Is it coming up to Briar Hill? That's my first question. We've seen or suggested that perhaps the activity during these first few weeks of COVID, which is our reality now and not just a temporary state, we saw different action at our waste management sites, but there isn't a lot of control at our waste management sites just because of the nature of how we operate them now, which needs changing. But with the near collapse of the recycling business, you know, I'm seeing a lot more stuff when I go to the dump up at Briar Hill, because I'm, you know, up there. I see a lot more stuff this year than last year, not because of COVID, that I would have thought would have gone into the recycling bins, but we are facing that challenge of what do we do with the recycling. So that's not in your brief either, but it's going to end up in landfills, and a lot of it does, no matter what we do. So what's next is not in your brief, but it's back to Councillor Maybe's comments about we as a council perhaps should be looking a little beyond 2 years, beyond 5 years, into 10 years, to Brian's point. But in terms of the impact, short-term impact on Briar Hill, given all our good friends from Lansdowne be coming up our way, is that what's going to happen?
I could, oh, sorry.
No, maybe Director Goheen might be able to better answer the question about where they might end up taking the garbage in the future.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Yeah, my comment there was intended for Councillor Maybe, but certainly fits with Councillor Jameson's comments, and that is that our comprehensive waste management plan that Council approved the funding for is unfortunately a victim of COVID. If we did not have to defer that project, I would argue we'd be well underway with starting to piece together some of these bigger picture, longer term waste management items. Exactly as Councillors Maybe and Jameson are commenting, we do need a longer term solution. The work that John and Albert are doing for us really is the day to day, and that will feed into the future plan. But what we really need is to move forward with that ultimate plan, and hopefully at some time here we can get that going, because it's no surprise to us as staff, council, and the ratepayers that this is something we all need to look at if we're going to be sustainable in terms of waste management. And I'll comment that, and John and Albert chime in, when it comes to Briar Hill, now that we have a good sense of what the life of that facility could be or may be, we've had discussions amongst us about operational improvements that could take place there to make that site function better and really support its longer lifespan. So right now it doesn't function, in my view, very well. I don't think there's very good oversight of what's being dumped at the waste face there, just by virtue that the attendant is waiting at the gate and sets people off toward the face. And so we are working on a conceptual plan on what we could possibly do at the site to make it function better and have more control over it. And those certainly will factor into any future improvements that we may propose as part of future budget cycles to council. Any comments, John and Albert, on that?
No, I think through you, Mayor, I apologize for my lack of decorum. And
Oh, no, don't worry about it. It's fine.
That's exactly right. I think I had friends go into Briar Hill just a few weeks ago and send me pictures saying, wow, this is quite a place. And I think one of the tasks looking at shrinking the waste space and potentially putting the waste into bins and batching it also assists with the amount of interim cover that has to be used, that takes
Right.
and really works to optimize how that site is operated. Will assist in maintaining that capacity. This landfill capacity is really a little bit of a gem of the municipality to hold on to.
Okay, any further questions for the delegation? We have, oh, sorry, Councillor Oki, I'll let you chime in and then we'll wrap this up. There, go ahead.
Worship, and through you, just listening to this and hearing the day-to-day concerns and some talk about the future. I was very interested when we first took office. The provincial government had a lot of emphasis put on a circular economy, where all these plastics would be virtually automatically recycled. That just seems to have gone the way of a lot of things with COVID. I've not heard anything since. Do you have any insight into that, please?
Director Goheen has got his hands up, so I'll recognize him.
Certainly, Your Worship, through you, the comment period, to my knowledge, on that has been extended. So the province is still taking comments from stakeholders on where we feel that timeline should be. And in our situation, we're a little bit different in that we have a vendor that takes it all away for us. We don't have that longer term contract at this point. And so we're waiting just as much as others to find out what the date for the transition, what the transition itself will look like to that full producer responsibility with the recycling. And then, but again, that will feed into that sort of longer term vision of how we're going to manage not only the solid waste, but also the recycling and organics and the tires and electronics and everything else. So it's all part of the bigger picture, which we unfortunately don't have a clear view of at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Jameson, follow up?
I just want to comment on the good points raised by both the director and the councillor. In 2008-9, there were a couple of countries in the world that just took everything and they didn't really care if it was contaminated. And I'm thinking specifically of the paper and the aluminum and a few other products, and that basically they were putting up with everything, but it's been systematically dropping to the point where they're not taking this product anymore. The challenge we have with the provinces talking about now is it's based, like usually these things are, on thinking from 2007, 8, and 9, and this is 2020, and that's so typical, and that's no fault against a current government. That's just the way these things go. So in our little township, we end up being go-alongs, but we are not going to see much potential for recycling to be as profitable as it was at one time for some municipalities. Those days are just simply over. And the danger we have if we don't find these alternatives like incineration is it's just going to get dumped somewhere. And that's my worry for the next generation, is what are they going to do with all this stuff? So I hope that we can be maybe thinking a little bit more about those kinds of things rather than just what's around us now for the longer term. Thanks.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to put the motion on the floor that's moved by Councillor Fody and seconded by Councillor Maybe. That committee of the whole thanked Mr. Patuak. I really need to practice that. I apologize again. And Mr. Pike for the presentation regarding the landfill compliance summary. Any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, carried. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking your time on this lovely Monday night to join us. And we thank you for your efforts on behalf of the municipality, keeping our township in check, especially with Ministry of Environment. Very important work that you do for us. So thank you very much. Okay, thank you. So, sorry, let me just pull up my agenda again. So next on the agenda is staff reports. Operations report number OPR-015-20 tender award road for road salt. Motion is put forward by Councillor Maybe and seconded by Councillor Fody that the committee of the whole recommends that council award tender OPS-2020-015 for the supply and delivery of coarse road salt to Compass Minerals Canada Corp. Discussion on this motion. Councillor Maybe and then Councillor Jameson. If we can have them unmuted.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Operations Director Adam Green. Compass Minerals, is that an Ontario product? And if so, does it meet provincial standards? Because I know that the provider on my own site at work can't get an Ontario product that meets the standards of the province and has to get it from Argentina. So I'm just wondering if you have any information on that. Thank you.
Dr. Goheen.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I wasn't aware until I looked just now. It appears that Compass mine is in Goderich. But yeah, it does meet, it has to meet Ontario standard for the gradation and the quality and the sort of thing. So yes, it's a standard product that municipalities utilize all across Ontario or the world, really.
Just a curiosity question for me, and I thank you very much, Adam.
Okay, Councillor Jameson.
So I'm trying to understand this, and you know, every $80,000 is $80,000 we don't have. So we're buying 808 tons. So that takes us to roughly $80,000. We appear to have 350 tons in hand. Am I reading? I mean, this memo is a little convoluted for me. It could just be me. But we bought 794 last year, and we bought 300. It's confusing for me. What did we actually use? What do we think we need And how much is that going to cost? In other words, if you have 350 tons in hand already, is how I'm reading this, why do we need 808 when we only used 800 last year? And I know the weather, I've been in Canada for a while. I know you have to balance your expectations to the weather, but I'm just trying to figure out what we spend, what we actually used against what we actually need, so that we know when we, prove these things, that it's consistent. That's my question. It's not to be hostile. I'm just not understanding it, Your Worship.
Director Goheen?
Yeah, Your Worship, through you. I have a sense that it equalizes year over year. So when I say we use about 795 tones last year, I would estimate that the same was probably left over the year before. So I don't have a quantity for what we have left in our domes. I know Lansdowne has very little there, relatively speaking, but I wouldn't know how many tones of salt is there because it's mixed with the sand. So the information was provided somewhat for context, basically to show that we're using more and more as time goes on, and it is related to the weather we feel. So difficult to answer exactly the question, and I do apologize if the report was somehow unclear with the information provided.
I would just add to that, Director Goheen, now that we have the tracking that is very precise on all of our trucks as far as dispersing the salt, where it was dispersed, when it was dispersed, how much, all of that sort of data, will that allow us to be more, like I do understand that part of it, ordering this in advance, is having it in our stores, because in the season, when it's in demand and high demand, it becomes more costly, I believe, to source it. And correct me if I'm wrong, Director Goheen, but would that not be a position, and I realize it's mixed with sand, so it is a little bit different, but is there a way that we could be more precise about how we dispense it and how much we use and how much we order and how much we keep in stock?
Yes, Your Worship, we do have that tracking system now that does calculate how much is used, and the more data we're able to collect, the better we're able to over time, determine whether it is a good application rate, I suppose. But there's still a lot of variables here, right, in terms of how much we use in any given storm in any given season. It really is sort of the nature of winter control that we will have these inconsistencies and these variances of the amount of materials we're going to use. But yeah, as we have the AVL installed over subsequent seasons, we're better able to track what we're actually putting down. But the numbers we provide here in the report are actual tonnages that were measured, so we know we received exactly that quantity because the trucks are all weighed, and so we're pretty confident with those numbers anyway.
So we're confident with what we've had delivered. We're just not confident what we have in stores right now.
That's correct. Yeah, we don't. Some municipalities will survey the amount and report it. Ours is more, or less accurate that way in terms of inventory.
Councillor Jamieson, follow up.
So all I'm saying is that it's very important to structure budgets based on use. And so if the director is saying that down the road, like for example, this time next year, we're going to be able to track what we have used, what we anticipate we're going to need against that use, and getting our farmer's almanac out, of course, as we always do, to find out what the winter's going to be like. It's just too vague for me, and it's like a lot of other things I think are vague. I'd like to see, as we're looking ahead to some of these other financial planning recommendations and asset management tracking that starts to give us precision. I'd like to see it in this too, because our works is a big dollar, and it's the one thing you get the most calls on is what's going on at works. So it's very good not to be an apologist for works. It's very good to be able to say, this is what we used and this is what we're going to need based on our best estimates. So let's look ahead to some precision.
Okay, any further comments or questions in regards to the motion that's on the floor in regards to awarding the tender for the supply and delivery of porous road salt? Seeing none, I'll call, Councillor Fody, you have something? Yeah, go ahead.
I did, thank you, Your Worship. I think Director Goheen just answered it. My question was, these loads coming in are offset with an official waste slip?
That's correct, they are. That's where I got the numbers from on the report.
Okay, and that waste slip is carried out in a place other than the seller's location?
Yeah, I believe Tackaberry is contracted to deliver it from the port. So yes, my recollection is that it's weighed on a third-party scale. I think it comes in at Johnstown, to be honest.
I was going to say it comes in the Johnstown port from Godrich. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further questions for the director? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Next, operations report OPR-015-20 Ivy Lea Wharf. So the motion's coming to the floor through Councillor Fody, who's making the motion, seconded by Councillor Maybe, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council direct staff to issue an RFP for consulting services to complete the detailed design and obtain regulatory approvals for the Ivy Lea Wharf improvements. Discussion on this motion. Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Director Goheen. I think I read it after I started talking here. The depth of the water at the front edge of the wharf presently, where they're planning on putting the retaining wall as a possibility. And the other caveat to that is, will the dock actually be raised any in the proposal, since we have a little bit more high water than we've anticipated in the last? Wouldn't take much to get it out of the water, I don't think, at this point. But and what is the square footage of that particular dock? If you have that, I would be interested. Thank you.
Director Goheen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I'm not certain of the actual depth. Part of the reason why we'll need to get geotechnical work done there is to determine what the depth to refusal, as it's called, is there. And that's going to play a big part into what those costs for the sheet pile will be. Again, the assessment that we had done previously was a higher level, and so it didn't take any measurements of that sort of thing. I'm sorry, I didn't mark down your second question. I have your third, but not your second, Councillor.
Yes, will the dock actually be raised any in his proposal, since we have had high water and the dock became very close or just under the level?
Oh, sorry, yes. So certainly we'll look at the elevations of it, because we're not going to want to put the $500,000 or whatever facility in danger of being inundated in the future. So we're going to want to make sure that that finished grade is high enough that it's a little more resilient against the higher potential higher water levels. But it also needs to be functional in the lower level seasons as well. So it has to serve its purpose. So I would say that we would structure the exercise that the consultant will look into all that and make an appropriate recommendation for any changes in the elevation of the finished grade there.
Yes.
And I'll have to get you the finished area. I don't have that in front of me here at home.
Yes, and I did have one follow-up, if you don't mind, Madam Mayor. Sure. The actual boat ramp that's attached to that particular dock, will it be improved with this future project? Maybe wider, longer, better access, parking requirements and such?
Your Worship, through you, that's really maybe a question I could turn back around. The scope of the project, as I see it, doesn't relate to the boat ramp at all, and so I wouldn't envision it at present to include a detailed look at that and the alignment of it and the function of it. But if it's something that council desires, we could actually write that into the RFP document as like a provisional item that they could sort of look at improvements of that ramp. But we need to be cognizant of the costs, right? Just the work that we're proposing to issue the RFP for, it's going to be considerable relative to the funding we have in the reserve for those types of projects. So adding another, just saying $20,000 or something like that to an exercise to look into that, public consultation, other study and review of any improvements or logical improvements to a boat ramp could drive the cost of that project up. So if it's something that council would like us to look into as part of this project, then it's really something we need to know now before we issue it.
And just as a follow-up, the boat ramp does attach to the east side of that particular wharf, does it not?
Yeah, I would say it's more sort of the fixed portion. The timber starts at I'd say the south edge of that boat ramp, and so the sheet pile would sort of encompass that, and we'd fix the floating dock to the sheet pile there. So as I say, it wasn't necessarily it's not part of the scope of the project as we are envisioning it now. But again, if improvements are to be contemplated to that, we'll need to know so we can get that written into the scope.
Perhaps maybe it should be, possibly added in. I'm not sure if it's total condition, the rampway, so that's why I'm kind of asking the question. If it's deteriorating at the same rate the wharf has, are we not looking after the whole issue then if the rampway is not rebuilt to a certain standard? I guess that's my question.
Through you, I'll respond that I feel that that's more stable over there. That area of the facility is more stable. But let me offer this: we can have it written in as a provisional item that's very clearly separate in the proposals that the consultants will submit, and then we can bring that back to council for your review and for your decision making process at that time. And so we can leave the scope up to council for approval when the RFP comes back before you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Councillor Jameson.
Your worship, to the director's point, it's probably a good path to go to at least write it up somewhere, whether we proceed with it or not, find out what it will cost. Because I think Councillor Maybe's making some very good points on this. The other thing is, went by me that public consultation is not part of this. Is that what I heard? If I did, that does concern me a lot, because we've had a lot of instances where the public would like to be consulted and are not. So I just raised that. If I'm incorrect in what I heard, I apologize, but I just worry about not asking the folks who pay the bills.
Yeah, and your worship, through you, certainly when it comes to the redesign of that facility, we're going to want to make sure that we're capturing the current use of it. I think that's the issue with it, is it wasn't designed for the service it's providing today. And so in order to contemplate any sort of improvements, we're going to need to undertake some sort of consultation process. Maybe not as significant as an environmental assessment would, but certainly there'll be a component there of consultation. Similar to our other projects, a Rockport boat ramp and those ones where we did do a bit of consultation to get people's opinions of what we were doing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fody.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I was just down there yesterday just to get up to speed for tonight's meeting on that site. Your new signage down there looks great, by the way. Is it having the intended effect throughout the work week? Are people paying attention and not parking there anymore? As of yesterday, there was no one there, but then again, it was a Sunday.
Your worship, through you to Councillor Fody. I'm down there quite a bit myself, and I haven't seen nearly as many people as I've seen just in general at that facility. So I'm not sure whether bylaws receive complaints or whatnot, or fire for that matter, but I've seen very few people. So I would say my own view would be that the signs are doing their purpose to a certain extent.
Okay, well, thank you for making sure those signs got up there. They have their effect visually, I know that. Just so happened yesterday when we were there, shortly after we left, an ambulance showed up to take a resident from a boat through that facility. So it goes to show the importance of our water residents, that we do have the, viable access when needed in this case of emergency at whatever level it may have been. And with reference to the boat ramp, it looks much newer than the old dock facility itself. That boat ramp doesn't look anywhere near the age of the actual Ivy Lea dock, as I would call it. It looks like we're talking, decades difference there.
Councillor Grow.
Thank you, Your Worship. When I read this immediately, I was a little confused, Adam, if you don't mind me saying so. We had an engineering report. The consultation was install sheet piling and so on. It sounds like a pretty good high-level engineering. And now we are asking, in addition to that concept, what? We're asking for environmental. I read all these words: topographic, environmental, geotechnical, and tender-ready drawings. What then was the purpose of the initial engineering report if it wasn't to do those sorts of things? I'm very confused by that. And I appreciate the bucks we're going to spend here. And I appreciate the previous comments that if we're going to spend the money, we need to make it useful in the broadest of terms. And therefore we can write some riders or whatever beside it. But I truly am confused here as to why we spent money, and you have them bullet points here. It all sounds pretty straightforward to me, but all of a sudden now we're talking, is this always phase 2? Was this always phase 2, the topographical, environmental, geotechnical, and tender-ready drawings? When the Rockport ramp was done, how many people actually are capable of doing this in our neighborhood? Very few. So one has to question it. What are we going to do? Bring people in from Hamilton to do this? I doubt it. We know who's going to end up this, probably. So are we chasing our tail here? Can we not just get her done? Thanks.
I think, not to usurp the director, but I think that often that we have to do these studies to ensure that that we're doing them to code, to meet whatever requirements to meet all of those needs, and without a third party to validate that, and without the expertise being on staff here, it requires us to go outside for those specifics. But I understand your point that the first sort of engineering report that was given on that, why wasn't it done there? That I don't have the answer to. I'll defer to the director for that.
And
thank you.
I just want to be clear. If it was always needed, I understand that. I just, the recommendations are pretty clear. And I just was unaware that things, we approved these things previously, and now we're being presented with, oh, by the way, we got to spend X for the environmental and . That's all. That's my confusion. Thank you.
Go ahead, Director Gohi.
Thank you, Your Worship. Hopefully I can clear that up. So when I arrived, there was a sense that all we needed to do at that facility was to redo the concrete slab. And so the amount in the budget at that time was based on just the knowledge I had walking in off the street, essentially, back in 2018. And so we came upon, or we were provided, underwater video footage of the facility from a local dive charter. And again, I'm no marine expert in this sort of thing, but when I viewed the footage and saw what that structure was made of below the surface, with rubble and cribbing, of dubious condition or whatever, it became clear to me that I needed some professional help. And so we needed to start with an assessment. I would call it an assessment. We had completed in 2018, which gave us the higher level idea of what we would be looking at with that sort of very high level estimate, because we need to inform, or I needed to have a figure to bring to council to inform a budget and a path forward on that. So again, it was deferred. We had the high water, didn't work on it. It's getting worse. And so now we need to move into the detail design phase. So we had an assessment that told us, here's your problem, here's what could be done to solve it. But now we need to move into the detail design. And it's a pretty standard process in terms of how a large scale project comes together. And so we'll, from this process, we will get the actual details sorted, as the name implies. And so we'll have the geotechnical, they'll find out where the rock is below the surface. We'll get some detailed boreholes of the facility itself to find out what's there and how much fill needs to come out, how much new gravel needs to go in. All of these things really need to be solved in great detail. So, a $10,000 assessment that we had done before doesn't give us that sort of level of detail, doesn't allow us to get regulatory and stakeholder approvals, doesn't allow us to hire a contractor to do the work. So this is the next step. I would say that it was always envisioned that we would need the professionals to get us to that point. And to your other point, Councillor, this is the model where we design, bid, build. So this is not a design build. Certainly there is that option to hire a contractor who will then hire the engineer to do that. But we don't know how much we're in for here. So it's very difficult to go in that regard at this point and to do a design build. Our recommendation is to move forward relatively slowly so council has an idea of the expenses we're looking at, the timelines, the approval processes, and then proceed to hire a contractor and get the work done. That's the method we're proposing for this project.
Follow up, Councillor Guerrero.
I'm sorry, this is going to sound argumentative, and it's not meant to be, through you, Your Worship. The Rockport dock, the federal government came out with an estimate of almost $1 million. Local contracting went in there and did it, and we know the numbers. I won't repeat them. They're available. It was half. And it just strikes me, if this is what has to be done, we are going to be facing far more money than what I'm looking at on that page over there. And it's very disappointing because this process is going to cost us more money than it need to, in my humble opinion. I'm not an engineer, but we're going to end up just stacking the costs on this. And it's a little bit frightening to me what we're going to end up with. And comparatively speaking, and I know, Adam, it's certainly not, this is not meant to be a criticism, it's just a fear that we're going to end up with numbers that are beyond what we're going to want to do. So thanks, I'll leave it at that. That's it, thank you.
Councillor Foti, I'll recognize you.
Thank you, Your Worship. On Councillor Grell's subject, on a project such as this, where you need expert, build techniques, you have to have knowledge of what you're doing, is what I'm saying. Do we have to put out an RFP on this, or can we as a council, or through the guidance of your own department, select who we want to do this job?
Sole sourcing, I don't think we can. Director Goheen?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. No, our procurement policy does require us to be competitive with this. And I would argue that we're going to have a hard time getting the approvals we'll need from the regulatory agencies unless we have the species at risk and all of the details sorted out. I mean, we can't just call them up and tell them that we're going to put sheet pile in. They'll want to know what our study looks like, what the design looks like. It's really the same process as the Rockport boat ramp, and it's we had to have a design. We had to be able to submit that to the DFO and the MNR. We had to get a species at risk study for that, and because that's the world we live in now. So it would be difficult for us to general contract this. Certainly, it's possible to have all that work done sort of piecemeal, but again, how do we know what we're looking at in terms of costs for us to be able to, for you to be able to fund it, right?
I think that the points are well taken, both from Councillor Foti and Councillor Grell and all the other comments that have been made. But and I'm not trying to add fuel to Mr. Grell's fire, but it's a very real fear. I'll use before we call the question, I want this to be known, is that there has been studies done for neighboring communities that like the Gananoque Wharf, which the first design build was $9 million. They were able to do it for 2.2 or something, right? So I appreciate the councillor's point that we want to make sure, but I also know that Director Goheen will be looking for individuals, engineering firms that specialize in this kind of work, not dabble in it, so that it's not overbuilt or underbuilt, that he will be looking for proposals from reputable companies. And this type of work is specialized, and you're right, Councillor Gorell. We're fortunate to live in an area where we have some contractors that this is their specialty. But unfortunately, due to the way that government works, we are backed into a corner to a certain degree in regards to how we source things. But it doesn't mean that we rubber stamp them either. So the point being that if we don't like what's come back to us when the estimate is made and done, we can ask them to really drill down, and that's the will of this council, and that's where we go for. The other point that I will make before we call the question is that this project has been on the books for at least 2, if not 3 years before Mr. Goheen was here to have repairs done or to have work done. And our taxpayers on the water, this is their roadway, this is their access point, and we have deferred the replacement of this, but now we're in a critical stage where it needs to be replaced. There's no sort of waiting around any further, I don't believe. And the taxpayers that live on the waterfront, especially down at the St. Lawrence River, the tax base there deserves to have their roadway, if you will, or their access point to be well maintained and safe. So that's my biggest concern as the mayor here. But I will call the question unless there's further comments or points to be made to this motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion at hand. Oh, sorry, Councillor Maybe, did you have a comment to be made? Sorry. Go ahead, Councillor Maybe.
Just one quick one, is that procurement of projects, you have to have 3 bids, at least we should be attempting that. So we have total transparency of this policy and anything else. That's all I want to say, thank you.
Fair point. All those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed? Carried, and the motion is carried. Thank you. Good discussion on this, gentlemen. Okay. So the next motion on the floor is the civic addressing. So moved by Councillor Maybe, seconded by Councillor Fody, that the committee of the whole recommends the council hereby approve civic addressing bylaw attached as Exhibit A to Planning and Development Report number PL-021-20, and further that the committee of the whole recommends that council repeal the following bylaws: bylaw number 15-95, 43-93/94, 95-21, 21-93, 30-1994, and 31-1996. Ms. Venditti, did you want to say anything before I ask questions in regards to this particular civic address bylaw?
Sure. Am I unmuted?
Nope, you're fine. Go ahead.
Nope. Okay. Thank you, through your worship. I just wanted to give this a little bit of an introduction. We were talking about the need for an updated civic addressing bylaw probably well over a year ago. So the version in front of you is a consolidation of some of the provisions that were in the previous bylaws, as well as an update to bring addressing in the township up to current standards, address road naming, address island naming. So it brings everything up to current standards. There's been a lot of research that's gone into pulling this document together to try to address everything. I'm pretty sure that as we work with it, there may be other things that come forward, and we may need to look at amendments to tweak it as we run into different situations, because civic addressing always comes up with its own challenges at times. But we're hoping that what we've got here is a great starting point to move forward so that we have a consistent approach to addressing throughout the entire township. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions from the members? Councillor Maybe, then Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Worship, and through you. The biggest one that I've seen is the enforcement part of it. Having property when it first came in and having to put up the sign and making sure that the blade is visible from from the roadway, which is the most important part of it for the emergency services, as Councillor Foti alluded to the boat coming in shore, it's still the same thing. Is that piece of apparatus is the most important thing almost in our township in emergencies. And so the enforcement of actually making sure that it's visible or stays visible or doesn't get moved by a new owner or such. What is your kind of look at who's enforcing it, how it's getting enforced, and who's mitigating that action? Thank you.
Through your worship. So section 5 of the bylaw outlines enforcement and penalties. So there are all of the requirements in terms of the blades being visible, where they're supposed to be posted, how they're supposed to be posted. The approach to enforcement would be that we would contact somebody if there is an enforcement issue. We would give them a certain amount of time to comply. If they don't comply, the township goes in and does the work and it gets put on their tax roll.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Councillor Jameson.
It really bothers me that Councillor Maybe always gets my question in first. But on that point about private roads, the general point about trying to make sure it's consistent with signs and so on, is it going to be possible for us to, meaning the township, to source and supply the signs that we would need on our private roads and the various branches off these private roads? Because I think I'm the only one in council on a private road, and I can tell you that some of those signs went up with the hippies, and they're cute, but they actually don't get you anywhere. So when we bring this to fruition, it may not be enough to provide us with that. We may, say, and for an additional $127 or whatever it is, we'll deliver the sign and put it up. I wonder if we could think about that as we move ahead with this. And I just want to say how much I appreciate your efforts to get us into the 21st century, is meaning you're having to move through the 19th and the 20th almost at the same time. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Any further questions in regards to this civic bylaw, or civic addressing bylaw, I should say? Sorry, Councillor Foti.
Your worship, through you, further to Councillor Jameson's comment, I partook in the original sign blade pilgrimage, if you will, back in the day when they were first all put up here. You encounter certain residents who are really resistant to wanting any kind of identification. I guess I was under the assumption, being a little naive, that we as a township and our works department put these blades up, but Councillor Jameson brought out a good point. I think we as a township, it's our responsibility to put these in place. If we're going to grant somebody a building permit and it's a house, or I don't care what it may be, I think it's imperative that we install these so that we don't come along with an ambulance or a fire truck 2 weeks or 2 years down the road and we can't find it because they forgot to put it up. I think if we're the ones collecting the taxes, it should be our responsibility to put these blade signs up.
So that would also come with a cost, I would assume. So, Ms. Beatty.
Through your worship, I was just going to state that there is a resourcing challenge with the township actually undertaking to put up all of the sign blades. So right now, if somebody comes in for a building permit or comes in with a request for an address on a vacant lot, we prepare the blade, we provide the post. There is a fee for a civic address request to cover the time that goes into assigning the address and reviewing it all. So we do all of that. We provide them with the specifications for installing it. We ask for verification that it has been installed. So a picture being emailed to us to show it or whatever, so that we can say that it's been put in properly. If we were to start to undertake correcting all of the ones out there that may be on private lanes or other things, that's a huge undertaking to do that at this point. And we are not resourced to be doing that. But now with this, if this bylaw should be approved, we've got the foundation to start making sure that it's in place going forward, and that we can be consistent in the approach with residents when they come into the office. So if someone comes in for a building permit, we're going to check their address. We're going to make sure it's what it needs to be. So it gives us the framework to start building on and making sure that these pieces are in place.
further question. Thank you, Ms. Venditti, for that clarification. I have no problem with that as long as you're asking for camera work or some type of identification that they have followed through with. That's encouraging. Thank you.
I'll recognize Councillor Oakey, then Councillor Jameson.
I just wanted to express, through you, Your Worship, I just wanted to express appreciation for Madam Planner's explanation of that. My experience, and I think I'm one of the most recent experience in this. I went into the office, I told them what I wanted. They gave me a blade sign saying, oh, you should be at 90 Thomas Road. And they gave me the post. I put it up, sent them a picture, and that was done. It was very simple. And what I'm seeing around is most people do that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jameson.
I know our planner understands this for sure. It's some of these additional signs. If I go in and get the permit and I get the blade and I put it in, it's got my number on it, that's one thing. But some of these directional signs that are very amateur oriented, that's where I'm looking for the township assisting, say, my road association, who will probably come and look for me this evening if I suggest that we should take responsibility for paying for those signs, but to the standard that you require. And hi neighbors, it's not that much money at the end of the day to make sure somebody can find your house, particularly my house, because I want the first responders to get to me as quickly as possible. So it's really just looking for the standard on the various names that seem to disappear in the snow and everything else that goes on in the winter. So that's really my point. Thank you.
Any further questions, or can we move forward on this one? Seeing no further questions, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? Carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, we'll do one more and then we'll move on, maybe have a break. Councillor Foti, moved by Councillor Foti, seconded by Councillor Maybe, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the application regarding a heritage celebration grant received for 436 Lyndhurst Road. So any further discussion, Ms. Venditti? Did you want to add anything, or it's pretty self-explanatory?
Pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward. Okay. So any further questions? Councillor Maybe.
This grant only applies, oh, sorry, Your Worship, through you. This grant only applies to historical buildings that are designated as historic buildings within our jurisdiction, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? Carried. Okay. The next report, sorry, my memory's not as good as it used to be. Sorry, I've got too many. So the official plan amendment. Maybe we'll have a quick break before we take this one on, just in case there's further discussion on this. So a 5-minute break, refreshment break, if you will. Madam Clerk, if you want to put us on hold for 5 minutes, and we'll take a break. Thank you. So I think we have everybody. I think we have Director Goheen and Director Tyndall, even though I can't see them. Nope, I can see them now. I'm going to assume that Director Tyndall is there. I also apologize. I should have mentioned earlier that Deputy Mayor Lackey sent his regrets and was not able to make it tonight. So he will hopefully be able to join us next week for council. So the next, too many screens. Need to open two of these. Okay, so back on the docket. So the next motion on the floor is moved by Councillor Maybe, seconded by Councillor Fody, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council receive Planning and Development Report number PL-023-20 dated July 6, 2020 for information purposes. Discussion on this motion. No discussion. Oh, of course. Councillor Maybe and then Councillor Gorell.
I was just waiting to see if anybody else wanted to jump in, Madam Mayor.
Well, maybe I should recognize Councillor Gorell first to see if he gets your question in first.
You could. I would be perfectly happy with that.
Okay. We'll recognize Councillor maybe next time I'll get the other guys in first.
Okay, that's why I was reluctant, slowing up. Anyways, I guess my biggest thing is significant wetland, and with our marinas and how the OP was actually performed and some of the litigations that happened because of that. I'm a little reluctant or questioning on how they actually are determining more wetlands. One of the maps showed like it was in the middle of a field also. So as much trouble as we have with wetlands, I'm wondering why this reinsurgence of trying to gain more. Like I realize some areas is pretty cut and dried. Actually, it's a wet area, not dried, but it makes sense to have it as a significant wetland. But there's other areas on the map that has been brought forward that, in my mind, just increases some difficult areas that we're already having battles over. So why are we doing that? And does that actually impact any future development of the areas of concern? Thank you.
Ms. Venditti, you want to respond to that?
Yep, thank you, through your worship. I've gone through all of the mapping that was associated with the county's official plan that is going for public meeting tomorrow. I would point out that the county's official plan is older than our official plan is. So the mapping that forms the provincially significant wetland in their mapping wasn't the most recent up-to-date mapping. And our current official plan reflects all of the mapping that they're proposing to update. So what they're doing is really more of an update. It's not creating any new wetland areas, and it has no impact on our official plan as it relates to the provincially significant wetlands, because those areas are already designated in our plan right now as approved.
Okay.
Is that everything?
Let me come back to it if I need to.
Okay, Councillor Gorell, go ahead.
No, I think it was answered by the planning department. I was curious whether these were new, and if so, do we notify people? But if they've been existing and it's just an update of county mapping, yeah. I understand, and that's fine. Thank you very much. Yep, we're good.
Councillor Fody.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you. When it comes to the significant wetland designation, who has the authority? Because we know it's been proven, and I could prove it with one quick map here right now. These aren't particularly accurate. Are they done with a drone? Are they done with a satellite? I don't know. But I mean, when it comes to questioning, once these areas are approved, who has the authority? Us as a municipality, the county, the people that designate the wetlands, the property owner that's being designated upon? I mean, I have a lot of questions with these significant wetlands because they never seem to come through in a public forum where there's a lot of input. It's usually a put down, and here it is.
Ms. Venditti.
Thank you, through your worship. The boundaries of the wetlands are defined through or by the Ministry of Natural Resources. And when they do that, it's usually done with a study to look at the boundaries, look at the land characteristics. So there's a little more to it than just looking at aerial photography or drone footage or something. But that doesn't go without saying that if somebody comes in with a development proposal on land that has what's shown as a provincially significant wetland on it, they can do an environmental impact assessment to have that looked at, but it still needs to be reviewed and approved by the Conservation Authority, by the Ministry of Natural Resources. It's certainly not a simple road to go down to redefine the boundaries of a provincially significant wetland.
Councillor Foti, just as an aside, there was a resolution that came to County Council, which I supported. And I will read that once you ask your question, but it's in specific relation to what we're discussing here. So I'll let you finish your question.
No, go ahead, because you may have my answer right before you.
Okay, so there was a motion that was brought forward at the last County Council, and it was moved by Councillor Doug Struthers from Merrickville Wolford. And I can't remember who it was seconded by. Whereas the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville received resolution number R-029-20 from the village of Merrickville Wolford pertaining to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry and its practices and procedures when designating provincially significant wetlands. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Council of the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville supports the village of Merrickville Wolford in its request that the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to review its practices and procedures and provide supporting evidence when expanding its designation of provincially significant wetlands, and that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry and our local member of provincial legislature, the Honorable Steve Clark. So based on this carried unanimously at the last council meeting. This is obviously a very hot button topic, and we're not the only municipality that feels this pinch. I know that the official plan at the county was challenged by the marina owners in TLTI, that they got together and basically went after the designation because it was I don't want to say it was an arbitrary designation, but it blanketed a lot of the marinas, which would have precluded them to make changes in the future, or it would have significantly impacted their ability to do so and to run a business. So they challenged the official plan and the wetland mapping, and they won. So they got the changes that they were looking for at the county level. So I think it really comes down to the fact that what Director Venditti said is that we don't have to take it lying down. Having said that, I still think it's important that we receive what the practice and procedures are and provide whatever supporting evidence they're using to basically say that these are provincially significant wetlands, which is, I think, what you're trying to ask for.
Correct. And the follow through, and it's refreshing to know that it was unanimous at the county level. Our own official plan was rushed through. We know it was. The election results pretty much bore out the sides that felt one way or the other. And that was a known fact in many of the situation. Having said that, having been a larger landowner than I am now, I have a real problem with outside entities enforcing their will upon landowners. I have a real good suggestion. Get your wallet out and buy it and do as you wish. Having said that, your county unanimous support is encouraging. But I would like to take that one step further. I likely can't, but these proposals should also be given to the adjacent landowner to which they are incurring this upon. Like take, for instance, the proposals we were given for tonight's meeting. Take Clark Marina on the west end of our township, for instance. If you took that significant wetland and gave it the teeth that sometimes they would like to have, Clark should be out of business tomorrow. And there isn't anybody that's a better steward of the water and the shorelines and the people that they look after in their seasonal being up there than Clark's. And there's plenty of others along our shorelines, as we well know, be it inland or on the river. But I think that the actual landowners that are incurred under some of these directives need to be not just informed, they need to be in on the process. Because we have these backdoor meetings is what they are, and come up with these policies, and it's choked into the owners pocket, whether they agree with it or not. And I'm definitely, as you can tell, not in favor of that.
Madam Clerk, would it be prudent for us to perhaps bring that motion from county to be supported? I realize that I believe it's a function of committee of the whole, not council, but I'm just wondering if it makes sense for us to support that. I know that we get correspondence that we have the opportunity to support. It wasn't brought forward for support, but it could be something that we could do, I guess.
Through you, Your Worship, it's actually a function of council, so it falls under an information item. So quite often, as you had indicated, we receive requests for resolution support from various municipalities and counties, etc. So if that was the case, we could put it on for support for next Monday's council meeting, if it was forwarded to me, if that was the will of council.
I think based on the response that I'm seeing, it could have further discussion, and I would be interested to know what Councillor or Deputy Mayor Lackey's interest is as well, because if the county is going to support this at the county level, then I think it would be prudent for us to support it here if there is the will of the council here. Anyway, so we'll look into bringing that forwards on a information item. Councillor Jameson.
Just want to say, I certainly take Councillor Fode's points, and the resolution seems logical, except that to what end? In other words, are we just standing up and pounding the table and saying we're not happy with something? Or do we have something tangible that we should actually bring to the table? That's my question.
I think, not to interrupt you, Councillor Fode, but to Councillor Jameson's question, what happened at the county level with our the marinas in our municipality who were blanketed by a PSW wetland symbol that was, I shouldn't say arbitrary, but it seemed arbitrary, and it cost them a lot of money to get it taken off. So I think the point that Councillor Fode is trying to make is that we should be standing up and saying, how is it that you're doing this so that we don't have future property owners having these designations without knowledge, or tell us at least what the process is, because I'm sure there is some science to it, but you can't tell me that they're going around and surveying by hand every significant wetland across the province. There's no possible way they could. So I think that it's worth the ask as to how they designate them, and B, where the notification process happens in putting that significant wetland designation on people's properties. Is that a fair synopsis, Councillor Fode? If we can get them on, there we go.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, you're correct. All I'm saying is what I reiterated before, is that if you're a property owner, nobody should be able to put onto you something that's against your will without proper, vetting. I mean, the process here is skewered big time in favor of some of these groups, and Minister of Natural Resources is not immune to this process. They know what they're doing, and they get everything in place first, and then through, be it ourselves or someone else, the property owner finds out what's been incurred upon them. And this is wrong. Our constitutional rights, I'd like to think, are a little better than what we have to offer here. But thank you for the opportunity of bringing that up to our council next week and see what we do with it for supporting the county council. But it's very encouraging to me as a member of this council to know that county's council passed that endorsement from Mr. Struthers unanimously. Thank you.
Ms. Venditti.
Thank you, through your worship. Just for clarification, there's no properties within our township proposed to be designated through what's in front of council tonight. What's in front of council tonight is simply an information report about an amendment to update the county's official plan, and our plan is already consistent with all of that mapping. So just want to make sure that there's no misunderstanding around that.
Right. But I think the ancillary question is
Yeah,
where do
no,
we-
I understand.
perfect, but I appreciate the clarity. So with that, unless there's further comments to be made, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed? Carried. Thank you. Next motion on the floor is moved by Councillor Foti and seconded by Councillor Maybe that Committee of the Whole recommends that Council receive Finance Report number FN-022-20 dated July 6, 2020 and approve the revised tangible capital asset policy. Ms. Tyndall, would you like to speak to that?
Sure, through your worship. So this is just basically an update to the policy to clean it up a little bit, add some more terminology and clarify some of the explanations and definitions. Just trying to basically inform some of the bases around the asset management work that we'll be doing. It's a high-level overview of the estimated useful lives as well, which we will be drilling down into more detail when we put together the asset management plan. So it's really just trying to tie it up and make sure it's consistent with best practice and it's clear and easy to read.
Thank you, Ms. Tyndall. Any questions in regards to the policy that's been put forward? Councillor Burrell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Having read through the document, it's clear this stuff feeds into what we're going to be talking about later this evening, and that's our public service software programs and so on. And everything ties together with a beautiful bow as to the valuations that are put on things at the very beginning of this are very important because we know that we're behind in our asset management allotments, the cash, if you will, and those reports keep coming back to us. So my question becomes, or pardon me, I'm trying to say it's very important that we nail the valuations there. And when I read the accountability on page 23 of this report, I just want to emphasize to all staff that those valuations are only going to, if they're poorly fed in the beginning, it's just tax increase after tax increase after tax increase in order to do our catch up. So I would like people to be very cognizant of the fact, and all employees, that every number that we put into this stuff is going to be critical to the needs and determinations for years and years to come. And therefore, what's the check and balance on that for council and for the township tax ratepayers? What's the check and balance? Do I just go out to a bridge and say, oh, we're not a bridge, but whatever? Who is doing that? Who's evaluating the stuff? How accurate and confident are we that it is correct? Because the finance department is going to do a great job with the software. Junk in, junk out, good stuff in, great stuff out. So what's the check on this? So that's all my point I want to make. It doesn't feed or embrace the report. It's a good one. It's just that is a concern I have, and I will continue to have it. Thank you very much.
Director Tyndall, do you have a two-line response to how you will be coming up with those asset? Will it just be input internally? Will it be external? How does that work?
Yeah, through your worship. So we're kind of talking about two different things. So this policy is really centered around recognizing the assets as we purchase them. So the historical cost, and to Councillor Gorell's point, this is actually it should be more straightforward because it's based on what we actually pay out in dollars at the time of purchasing our assets or putting them into production, into use at management plan, and how we start to look at what the replacement cost will be. So that's when we start looking and say, well, this was the historical cost, in 2020, it has to be replaced in 2040. What do we think that replacement cost will be? So we can look at basically indexing at a CPI increase inflation over the next 20 years. We start to look at studies. We start to look at past performance of those assets. And I could probably talk about that for a lot longer. But anyway, the bottom line is that is a much bigger and more involved and will evolve as we work on asset management over time. We will get better at predicting those replacement values, and they will definitely be obviously much higher than their historical cost has been that we're capturing through this policy.
Okay. Does that help inform you, Councillor Garrell?
It certainly does. It's
Okay.
just, I see the ongoing issue. The data
It's a bit of
has
a moving target.
we can make it.
But I'm sorry, just through your worship, one more point, and that's the whole idea with the software is that it will become a database of every single asset we have, every single historical cost. It also allows us to do detailed calculations based on different types of inflation. We can keep track of maintenance. So it all builds up to what that replacement cost looks like on an asset by asset basis. So the software is that tool that allows us to do a lot of that analytical and predicting what those replacement costs will be, which will help us form the plan we need to look at for budgeting and financial sustainability.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Councillor Jameson.
Your worship, I am not going to put words in Councillor Garrell's mouth, but he sort of cut to the chase on accountability and the garbage in, garbage out challenge. It means that this report is very succinct and it's very clear, and it lays out an expectation for staff in that accountability track. And I think what I'm hearing is that we have to know that the treasurer is going to get the support needed to do this well, in the context of what has been so well presented. The other thing, and I think it's in this report, but I made a note about it, is the issue of doing our own statements. And I can't recall if it's in this report or a couple of other things we're looking at, that I think that's critical too. Once you get an assessment in place of your assets and you're doing your own statements, not the trial balance and not the search, the trail. You're not doing the trail, the audit trail or the trial balance, but you're doing statements on a quarterly basis. That too is a way for us to see, or council or future councils to see that this very carefully crafted approach is being managed well in the context of statements that now we see a report here or we see a call for a tender there. We've seen the budget in a context months ago, and then we're just dealing with pieces. So this is a framework for moving ahead that I really respect, but I am concerned that everybody's on the program, everybody is marching to the same tune, so that we're not made to look like we back something that doesn't deliver. So I share that concern.
Are there any other further questions for the treasurer in regards to this policy? CAO, you have something to add about that?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Councillor Jameson's comments are very well taken. The senior management team is on board as part of the asset management planning. So we have buy-in at the senior level. It's going to be my job to make sure that that buy-in stays at the level that it's at now. So it's my responsibility to support Director Tyndall in making sure that she gets what she needs for as far as information for the assets, for their accurate costing and longevity and replacement costs. So that's something I'm committed to as well. So I think we're all on the same page on this one. So thank you, Councillor, for your comments.
Thank you, CAO. Any further questions or concerns? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed? I'm going to say that you are in, Councillor Jameson. And it carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so next on the docket is another motion put forward by Councillor Maybe and seconded by Councillor Fody that the Committee of the Whole receive Community and Business Services Report number CB-019-20 for information as it relates to the opening of Kendricks Park, and that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve resources required to open public washrooms at Jerry Park, Centennial Park, and Furnace Falls Park, and that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the resources necessary to keep 2 students on staff for the balance of the summer to assist with park maintenance and mowing. Discussion, Ms. Goodman, you want to speak to this, or do you want to just take questions? I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so Councillor, is there anybody else other than Councillor Maybe that has a question? Oh, Councillor Jameson and then Councillor Maybe. Oh, were you joking?
No, I defer to Councillor Maybe because he'll ask my question better than I will. So
Fair enough. Fair enough. We'll leave it to Councillor Maybe and then Councillor Fody.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you and to my colleague, Councillor Jameson, for allowing me this opportunity. Cleaning of the bathrooms is one of the bigger ones for me, and that in the information, it indicated that every 2 hours, and then it also talked about the various locations around the township that must be cleaned. And my biggest question is it the same 2 students proposed, or are there other people that are going to be put into service to actually make sure that the bathrooms are kept to the standard that is required for this particular process of life? And to go along with that is then all the garbage cans that are in these parks and or the bathrooms, being emptied on a more regular and frequent basis, because as we know, people are still out and about and using garbage and putting it into these receptacles, and maybe they aren't getting removed as they once were or as quickly. So we do need to, promote that and maybe get that happening on a more consistent basis. And I know that as a council, we did say, okay, we got to rein back, but we also know that we were going to come back out of this and need to put more money back into the coffers to actually get all these little things done, which the summertime requires us to have. And in saying that, what kind of PPE and what kind of products are being used in the bathrooms to fight COVID-19? I know it's a lot to take in, Ms. Goodman, but those are the questions that I have so far. And we'll see what your response is and see if I have more. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. That is a bit of a laundry list. So really what we're proposing is that we do recognize that we do have some staff working on reduced hours, and in fairness should be given an opportunity to return to full hours. But the concept is to hire 2 students or to have two staff people allocated to this particular project, shall we say, or program. What they would do is start at one particular location, and I'm very cognizant of some of the comments that have been made, prior to the agenda being posted and some of the correspondence that's happened. But perhaps we start up in the north end of the municipality where we can open a washroom earlier. Based on time, and it is kind of an estimation that a staff person could clean at one facility, use the SUV, relocate to the next facility, let's say Sealy's Bay to Lyndhurst, from Lyndhurst then to Lansdowne, and then repeat that circle through the day. Really, we do recognize that one deep cleaning is required a day. The other cleanings are touch points and whatnot, which should allow us to move through the facilities at a reasonable pace. Of course, we are using products that would be approved by the public health unit in terms of their ability to provide ample disinfection, and that training as per the MSDS sheets would be provided, and the appropriate PPE is recommended not only on the MSDS sheets, but anything that's being required due to COVID. So for example, gloves, masks, et cetera, et cetera. So again, having just opened Kendricks today, I know that those couple of students went through the ringer in terms of what the expectations are, sign off, how they are to protect themselves, and kind of make sure that we're keeping on track of that. At each of the locations, as we've discussed, or that are discussed in the report, we've kind of made the adaptation so that all of those washrooms have automatic opening and closing
doors. So what we can kind of do is actually extend the 7.5-hour workday by an additional 2 hours by either having the washroom cleaned and locked and then opened earlier in the day to provide that until the student can show up, or that when they do their last cleaning of the day, that the washroom could stay open for another hour after they're there. Again, the health unit has been quite clear on their recommendations and guidelines in terms of frequency. So that's really what's posed the challenge in terms of, we can't just jump over there and do it 2 or 3 times, but in terms of public safety, that we want to be cognizant of the fact that these are areas of possible exposure, and that especially with young children that are a little bit harder to monitor in terms of what they're touching and everything else. So this kind of makes sure that we're providing a safe space. We're proposing that this would start, of course, as soon as possible and go through to the end of August, when students would be returning to school and our tourist season somewhat begins to slow down as we head into shoulder season. I think that was kind of the meat and potatoes of it, Councillor, maybe, but if there was something else, please feel free.
Yeah, well, there's 2 points. The one was about the garbage pickup, which was part of that, but coming back to cleaning of the bathrooms, what if there's an accident in a bathroom and your students are at another location? Is there precautions or somebody going to be on site that possibly can look after that situation?
Thank you, Councillor, maybe, and through you, Your Worship, to address the garbages first. Where possible and where needed in support of the operations crew, I believe this crew could provide some additional support to the work that's being conducted under operations, especially as we would be providing coverage on weekends. So that would help round out and increase our service levels potentially. If there was an accident, really, I think if it was reported, it would be it wouldn't be any different than any other time when we've had to respond to an emergency, if possible, depending on the nature of the locking doors. If we can hit that remotely, then we would. Otherwise, staff would probably be routed particularly to that location. We do have a few people that we could call on should the need arise.
Okay, well, that's very good. Thank you very much.
Councillor Fody, and then Councillor Jameson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I assume that each of these workers are going to have a timesheet that they retain to basically cover their track should it need be.
Yes, and through you, Your Worship. The nice thing is actually our vehicles have tracking, so we will know that they've been conducting their routes in a timely way. But we also plan to have sign-off sheets in the washrooms that indicate here are all the touch points. This is the cleaning, and that it would be signed on a regular basis so that we can demonstrate that we're being proactive, safe, and following the recommended protocols and procedures, and that their time sheets really should match the times that those things are initialed, like those checklists that would remain in the washroom are initialed. If not, it would definitely give us cause to go back and do some follow-up. However, I would say by and large, we've been very fortunate with our summer hires year after year. So.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jameson, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a couple questions. First of all, I mean, it's a very well-crafted plan, and you mentioned the recommended protocols and so on. So I dug some out based on trying to understand what exactly those protocols are. So I appreciate that taking some of these things that were being recommended to do and trying to turn them into a practical application is no small task. So I appreciate quality of the effort. And it's a rhetorical question that the assumption is the risk management around this has been reviewed with respect to the exposure of employees, whether they're summer students or full-time employees, they are our employees. And it's a rhetorical question because I would be very surprised if that hadn't been considered. But the risk management is important. Do you want to comment that before I ask another question, Your Worship?
Go, Ms. Goodman.
Certainly, and through you, Your Worship. Really, it was the Leeds and Grenville Health Unit that are putting out some of the recommendations. Some of these relate to, again, you know, they're saying that no additional PPE is necessarily required for some of this work, but you know, under the best of circumstances, even on any given year, we still send our students in, you know what I mean, with eye protection should they request it, full latex gloves and whatnot. We are using appropriate materials and whatnot. When we had the staff start to return to the office, we did a comprehensive, a 45-minute to 1 hour training session with them. And we went so far as to include how to properly don and doff your PPE to make sure that people recognize maybe when you're putting your hands to your face and not, for example, and the kinds of products that they're recommending. I know I'm horrible for it, right? Anyways, so really we're trying to meet these requirements to the absolute best of our ability. We do recognize that there are some that are kind of taking these as loose guidelines. However, we do take public safety and the safety of our staff quite seriously, and I would rather see them well-trained, well-armed, and well-prepared to take this on should council approve this.
Okay, well, I appreciate you saying that, erring on the side of caution. I appreciate that. Just a couple of comments. I think the issue of, okay, we have directed staff to reduce budget in the face of the longer term challenges that it's inevitable we're going to face fiscally. So in terms of addressing things like, we have closed garbage cans, but people still leave garbage. So we've got to get over the idea that it's going to work. We still have to get it. And I think it's less about opening the coffers and more about being a little smarter about how we allocate the resources, also figuring out who's doing what. Is it parks? Is it works? I mean, there's got to be a plan where you're responding to a challenge, and the challenge in the villages are right in your face. You can manicure a road until there's no tomorrow, but the stuff in the villages gets seen first, they get seen often, and if we don't react to them, councillors become an apologist for stuff that doesn't happen. And it's not even remotely necessary. It's just a matter of managing very smart on the optics, which has been my mantra, which I know is not particularly well received, but it remains my mantra. So it's not a question of, it's working smarter, not with more money. So let's look at it that way. But I very much appreciate this approach, and I'm certainly one that will support it. Thank you.
Any further questions for the director before we call the question? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Brout.
Just through you, Your Worship, just clarification. I see at one point there is, costs open to public washrooms, and then it's got A, B, and C. Are those our choices, or is that all of that can happen?
Any one of those really could happen, and it is kind of an HR sort of thing, again, recognizing the situation of some of our staff. I think
Right.
that offer will be made first, and then we will fall to one of those other options. But I wanted to make sure that you had an understanding of the full spread of what the potential financial impact could be.
Thanks, Kim. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion at hand, please signify. All those opposed? Carried. Thank you. Next motion that's on the floor is moved by Councillor Fody, seconded by Councillor Maybe, that the committee of the whole adjourn to form in camera to consider personnel matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, as it pertains to the review of qualifications for appointment of a committee. Oh, Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just before that, you have other business. And I did have one item that I wanted to ask the chief while he's here.
Oh, I apologize. Yes, my apologies. I was thinking that was after the in-camera.
Yes, and through your worship to Chief Lawson, what are our fire conditions in our township, and how is it going to play here? Because I know we're on the brink of a fire ban, but I want to get your take on it, please. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Maybe. Just today, I've gone over the indices and indicators of from the parks different values that we kind of go by to evaluate where we are with the fire ban. Tomorrow, due to the upcoming weather, possibly in the 30s all week, no indication of any more rainfall, I will be putting a fire ban in the township for everything but a cooking fire. If it's absolute necessary, that's the only way you can cook your meal or whatever, but it has to be extinguished right directly after it. Also with that, we are readdressing the open air burning bylaw, and there'll be some amendments to it that we'd like to add for the build-up areas for small campfires, chimeneas, things that are allowed in such places as the city of Kingston and different areas. We've had quite a request for this, and therefore we'll be readdressing that and coming back with an amendment to the bylaw for council's approval. But at this time, it looks like we're going to go into a fire ban tomorrow due to the fact we are in a level 1 drought situation. I did hear of a couple of farms, people that have lost their wells. They have to wait overnight for them to come back. And we are ready to respond in emergency situations to deliver lake water to farm animals in emergency situations.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chief. Thank you.
And thank you for bringing that up. I know that hopefully you haven't been overwhelmed with the number of calls, because I know that there's still calls coming in, and I know of some burning on the weekend that was a bit excessive.
Yeah.
But
that's where we're at. It's the neighbor on neighbor complaints that we're dealing with more than anything. It's usually a dispute between two neighbors, and as soon as you light the match, then there's a reason to call. And we're having quite a few of those. We've rectified a few of them, and other ones I've suggested neighbors get together and get to know one another better.
Perfectly. Okay, thank you, Councillor, maybe for bringing that up. Councillor Oki, you want to add to that? There we go.
I'd like to add another item of business. We've paid a lot of attention to the villages, and we should, because of garbage situations and washroom situations and merchants feeling pressure because of that. But I'm getting complaints or stated concerns down the back roads because of decay of hard surface roads, and also the grass cutting along the roads. Some people are saying it's hard to see around the hayfield that's growing up along the edges of the roads. So I'm not sure if that's a factor of our reduced staffing, or just that we're paying attention elsewhere at this point in time. But I am getting those concerns or complaints expressed to me, and I just thought I should bring it up at this point. Thank you.
I would just encourage you, Councillor Olkey, to ensure that if people do have those complaints, that they go through the report it function if there's a major concern about a blind spot where people can't see when they're pulling out, so that if it is a safety concern, that it can be addressed. The biggest thing is that if they have it logged through the report it function, then it's noted. So just if they can, that's the best way to do it. Correct, Director Goheen? Okay. Any other business? Seeing none, I'll put the motion back on the floor. Again, moved by Councillor Fody, seconded by Councillor Baby, that the committee of the whole adjourn to form in camera to consider personnel matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, as it pertains to the review of qualifications for the appointment of a committee and HR matters. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? Carried. Okay, so we'll ask the clerk to stop the live stream.